The Grand Council chamber of Kepler Prime Station stretched across 300 meters of polished crystal flooring, where representatives from 12 of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations had gathered for an emergency session that would determine the fate of countless worlds across the Outer Rim territories. Ambassador Richard Hayes stood near the human delegation table, his dark suit looking plain compared to the elaborate robes and exotic armor worn by the alien diplomats around him, watching as each species announced their military contribution to the defense fleet. The Keltheran Empire representative, a towering insectoid creature named Jexnal, raised 4 of his limbs in a gesture of pride as he declared that his people would send 200 warships to combat the approaching Vorathian swarm. Beside him, the Zintian Collective's ambassador, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, pulsed with satisfaction while announcing their contribution of 150 battlecruisers, equipped with their most advanced plasma cannons. One by one, each civilization added their forces to the growing armada, speaking of honor and duty and the sacred obligation to protect the innocent species, threatened by the relentless biological horror that was the swarm. The Vorathian swarm had consumed 17 colonies in the past 6 months, their bioships spreading across space like a plague, converting everything organic into more of themselves, growing stronger with each world they devoured. Richard watched the proceedings with patient eyes, knowing his turn would come soon, aware of what reaction humanity's contribution would receive from these ancient and prideful civilizations. When the council moderator finally called upon the human delegation, Richard stepped forward onto the speaking platform, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes upon him, some curious, most indifferent. The United Earth government pledges 1 vessel to this defense effort, Richard announced in a clear voice that carried across the massive chamber. The ship Columbus will join the fleet at the designated rally point for 3 full seconds. Complete silence filled the council chamber. Then the laughter began. It started as a low rumble from the Keltheran section, Jexnal's mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his species, quickly spreading to the other delegations like ripples across water. The Zintian representative flickered with colors that Richard's cultural briefing had taught him meant contempt mixed with pity. "Surely the human ambassador jests," Jexnal said loudly enough for everyone to hear, his translator rendering his clicking speech into common galactic language. 1 ship against a swarm of 3,000 biovessels. This is either a poor attempt at humor or evidence that your species does not comprehend the magnitude of this threat. Other voices joined in, some asking if humanity had misunderstood the briefing, others openly mocking Earth as a backwater planet that had stumbled into faster-than-light technology through luck rather than genuine innovation. Richard remained calm on the platform, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the mockery to run its course as he had known it would. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 50 years earlier, making them the newest members by several centuries. Treated more like probationary students than equals by civilizations millions of years older. Every proposal Earth scientists had brought forward was dismissed as derivative of existing technology. Every tactical suggestion ignored as the naive thoughts of a species that had never fought a real war among the stars. "Ambassador Hayes," the Zintian representative said with barely concealed condescension, "perhaps you should contact your government and inform them that this situation requires more than symbolic participation. We are facing extinction-level danger, not conducting a diplomatic exercise. The Columbus is sufficient for our contribution," Richard replied evenly, meeting the crystalline being's gaze without flinching. "Earth stands by its commitment." More laughter followed, this time mixed with head-shaking and what appeared to be sympathetic looks from some of the less hostile delegations. The Drachnary ambassador, a reptilian being covered in iridescent scales, leaned over to whisper something to his aide that made both of them hiss with amusement. "Very well," the council moderator announced with resignation clear in his multi-tonal voice. "Let the record show that humanity contributes one vessel to the defense fleet. May we all hope it does not become a memorial to human hubris." The session continued with discussions of tactical deployments and supply lines. But Richard noticed that no one bothered to ask for human input on strategy. Their single ship already dismissed as irrelevant to the coming battle. When the session finally adjourned, Richard made his way through the station's corridors toward the human delegation quarters, passing clusters of alien diplomats who fell silent as he approached, then resumed their conversations with barely suppressed laughter once he passed. Captain Daniel Ross was waiting in the briefing room when Richard arrived. The military officer standing by the viewport that showed the Columbus docked at one of the station's outer pylons. "I take it the announcement went as expected?" Daniel asked with a slight smile that showed he already knew the answer. "They think we are fools sending one ship against impossible odds," Richard confirmed, moving to stand beside the captain, both men looking out at their vessel. The Columbus appeared unremarkable from the outside. A mid-sized Explorer-class ship that matched the basic design principles common throughout the galaxy. Nothing about its hull suggesting the revolutionary technology hidden within. "Good," Daniel said quietly, his smile widening just a fraction. "Let them think whatever makes them comfortable. They will learn soon enough what humanity can accomplish when underestimated." The Columbus crew was already preparing for departure. Lieutenant Lisa Chun running final navigation checks while Engineer Kevin Marsh supervised the power systems that most of the galaxy did not even know existed. Medical Officer Nicole Park was organizing the medical bay, preparing not for casualties, but for guests who would need treatment for shock and disbelief. "How long until we reach the rally point?" Richard asked. 36 hours at standard cruise," Daniel replied, then added with satisfaction in his voice, "Just enough time for the other fleets to gather and congratulate themselves on their superior numbers." Through the viewport, they watched as a Kelthoran battleship cruised past, its weapons arrays bristling with enough firepower to level a continent. The kind of raw military might that had kept the Empire dominant for 10,000 years. "They built their strength on overwhelming force," Richard observed, "throwing masses of ships and weapons at every problem until it breaks. And we built ours on something they never valued." Daniel finished the thought. "Innovation born from isolation, creativity fueled by being dismissed, the determination to prove that new does not mean inferior." The Columbus began its departure sequence, thrusters firing in gentle pulses that moved the ship away from the docking pylon. As they pulled away from Kepler Prime, Richard's communicator buzzed with an incoming message from Jexnal himself. "Ambassador Hayes," the Keltheran's translated voice carried obvious superiority. "I wanted to personally ensure you understand what your ship faces. The swarm shows no mercy. Retreat is not cowardice when facing overwhelming odds. Your single vessel need not become a pointless sacrifice. I appreciate your concern," Richard replied diplomatically. "But the Columbus will be exactly where it needs to be when the battle begins. On your heads be it then," Jexnal clicked. "At least you cannot say the Keltheran Empire did not try to save you from your own foolishness." The communication ended, and Richard exchanged another knowing look with Daniel across the galaxy. The various fleets were already moving toward the rally point, thousands of warships converging on the coordinates where they would make their stand against the swarm. In command centers and war rooms throughout a dozen civilizations, strategists and generals made their plans without bothering to include a single human ship in their calculations. On the Keltheran flagship, Admiral Jexnal studied tactical displays showing the positions of all allied forces, his multifaceted eyes barely registering the tiny blip that represented the Columbus. "Put the human ship in the rear support position," he ordered his tactical officer, "where they can watch real warriors fight and perhaps learn something before they die." The tactical officer acknowledged the order with clicking mandibles, adding a note to the deployment roster that would ensure the Columbus stayed far from any meaningful action. What none of them knew, what none of them could have guessed from their long experience and ancient wisdom, was that humanity had spent 50 years of isolation working on a problem the galaxy's greatest minds had declared impossible, while other civilizations refined their existing weapons and built larger fleets using the same principles their ancestors had used for millennia. Human scientists had pursued a different path entirely. Dr. Amanda Wright had spent 30 years being laughed at by the galactic scientific community. Her theories on quantum superposition dismissed as fantasy. Her papers rejected from every major journal. But Earth had given her resources anyway, not because they were certain she would succeed, but because being underestimated meant humanity had nothing to lose by trying the impossible. The Columbus moved through space toward its destiny. See, the rally point near the Theta system had become a gathering place for the largest military fleet assembled in 3 centuries. Over 2,000 warships from a dozen civilizations, hanging in space like a forest of steel and energy. Their combined firepower enough to crack planets? The Columbus emerged from its faster-than-light jump at the edge of the designated coordinates, immediately dwarfed by the massive vessels surrounding it like a child among giants on the bridge. Captain Daniel Ross studied the tactical display showing the positions of allied ships, each one representing centuries of military tradition and technological refinement. "Communications are lighting up," Lieutenant Lisa Chun reported from her navigation station, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. 17 different channels making comments about our arrival. "Let me guess," Daniel said with a slight smile. "They are placing bets on how long we survive the first engagement?" "Actually, sir," Lisa replied, glancing at the translations scrolling across her screen, "most of them are not giving us that much credit. The Keltheran tactical officer just suggested we dock inside one of their carriers for protection." Engineer Kevin Marsh looked up from his console where he was, running diagnostics on systems that would appear completely normal to any external scans. "Should I send them our polite decline?" "No need," Daniel said, watching as a priority communication request came through from Fleet Admiral Krenth aboard the Zintian command ship. "I suspect we are about to receive our orders." The view screen activated to show Admiral Krenth's crystalline form pulsing with the confident colors of a being who had commanded fleets for longer than human civilization had existed. "Captain Ross," Krenth's voice resonated through the bridge. "Your vessel will take position in Sector 774, rear support formation. You will monitor communications and provide assistance to damaged vessels retreating from the front lines." Daniel kept his expression neutral, recognizing the assignment for what it was, a way to keep the beast that took Columbus out of the actual fighting where it might become a liability. "Understood, Admiral," he replied formally. "The Columbus will proceed to assign coordinates, Captain," Krenth added with what might have been concern or pity in his tone. "I want to be clear that there is no shame in remaining at a safe distance. Your species is new to galactic warfare. Observation can be as valuable as participation. We appreciate your consideration," Daniel said diplomatically, ending the communication before his smile could break through his professional facade. "Sector 774, Lisa announced, already plotting the course. "Approximately 4 million kilometers behind the main battle line. Basically as far from the action as possible, while still being in the same star system." "Perfect," Kevin said from his engineering station, his hands moving across controls that were gradually bringing dormant systems online. "That gives us plenty of room to work." Medical Officer Nicole Park emerged from the corridor leading to the medical bay. carrying a data tablet. I have the medical bay prepared, sir. Though I am expecting our patients will be suffering from psychological shock rather than physical injuries. Probably accurate, Daniel agreed. Then activated the ship-wide intercom. All hands. This is the captain. We are approaching our assigned position. Prepare for combat operations. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each person understanding their role in what was about to unfold, what the galaxy was about to witness across the assembled fleet. Commanders reviewed their battle plans in holographic war rooms, arranging their ships into attack formations that had been perfected over millennia of warfare. On the Keltheran flagship, Admiral Jacksnau studied intelligence reports on the approaching Vorathian swarm with 4 of his eyes, while using the other 2 to monitor fleet positions. The swarm has been detected at the edge of the system, his tactical officer reported. Estimated arrival in 2 hours. Current count shows 3,147 bioships. Jacksnau's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. Deployed the fleet in the Delta Formation. Heavy cruisers at the center, fast attack wings on the flanks. We will crush them with superior firepower and tactical discipline. What about the human ship, sir? The tactical officer asked. What about it? Jacksnau replied dismissively. They are so far back they might as well be in the next star system. Let them watch from safety while real warriors do the fighting. In Sector 774, the Columbus held position alone, the nearest Allied ship over 1,000,000 kilometers away. Daniel stood from his command chair and walked to the engineering station where Kevin was monitoring power levels that were climbing steadily. How long until we are ready? Daniel asked quietly. Quantum drives are charging now, Kevin replied, his voice carrying barely suppressed excitement. Dr. Wright's calculations were conservative. We are actually getting better efficiency than the test runs back on Earth. Lisa turned from her navigation console. Sir, I have programmed the probability matrices. When you give the word, I can initiate the cascade sequence. Outstanding, Daniel said, moving to stand at the center of the bridge where he could see all his crew. We have worked toward this moment for 5 years, trained for it, prepared for it. And now we get to show the galaxy what human innovation really means. The crew met his gaze with determination and pride. Each of them volunteers who had given up normal careers and lives to be part of this mission. Nicole had turned down 3 prestigious medical positions to serve on the Columbus. Drawn by the chance to make history, Kevin had left his job designing civilian transport drives. Recruited personally by Dr. Wright when she saw his unconventional approach to quantum mechanics. Lisa had been the youngest navigation officer in the Earth fleet when she applied for the Columbus project. Her spatial reasoning scores the highest ever recorded. And Daniel himself had spent 20 years in the military dreaming of the day when humanity would earn real respect among the stars, rather than tolerant condescension. Sensors are detecting the swarm entering the system, Lisa announced. Her voice steady despite the magnitude of what that meant. The view screen showed long-range scans of the approaching enemy. Thousands of organic vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, living ships grown rather than built. Controlled by a hive intelligence that knew nothing of mercy or negotiation across the Allied fleet. Weapons systems powered up, shields activated. Crews moved to battle stations with the crisp efficiency of professional warriors. All ships, this is Admiral Krenth, the fleet-wide communication broadcast. Prepare for engagement, for the innocent lives depending on us. For the civilizations we protect, we will show the swarm that this is where their expansion ends. Thousands of voices responded with battle cries in dozens of languages. A chorus of determination that filled the communication channels. The Columbus remained silent, but on its bridge, Daniel gave a small nod to Kevin. Begin preliminary cascade activation, he ordered calmly. Kevin's hands moved across his console. entering commands that initiated systems the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. Technology that humanity had developed in secret while being dismissed as technological children. Deep within the Columbus, quantum drives began to hum with power that folded space and probability together, creating conditions that should have been impossible according to every physics model the galactic community accepted. External sensors on nearby Allied ships detected unusual energy readings emanating from the human vessel. A Keltheran science officer reported the anomaly to his commander, who dismissed it as probably a malfunction in the primitive human power systems. The swarm advanced steadily, their bioships moving with the terrible coordination of a single vast organism. Targeting sensors already locked onto the largest concentrations of Allied vessels. "Contact in 15 minutes," Lisa reported, her fingers steady on her controls despite her elevated heart rate. "Fleet is moving to intercept." Tactical displays showed the Allied warships surging forward, ready to meet the swarm with overwhelming force. Daniel watched the approaching enemy on his screens, calculating distances and timing in his head. "Admiral Krenth is hailing us," communications officer reported. Neil accepted the connection, and Krenth's crystalline form appeared on the view screen. "Captain Ross, fall back another 2 million kilometers," the Admiral ordered. "The swarm's range is greater than we initially calculated. Your current position may become contested." "Negative, Admiral," Daniel replied calmly. "The Columbus is exactly where it needs to be." Krenth's form flickered with colors that indicated confusion. "Captain, I am ordering you to retreat. This is not negotiable." "With respect, Admiral." "We did not come here to run," Daniel said, his voice carrying quiet steel. "We came here to fight. With one ship?" Krenth's disbelief was obvious even through the alien communication. "Captain, bravery without sense is just another word for suicide. You wanted to see what humanity could contribute to this battle," Daniel replied, his hand moving to signal Kevin. "Now you are going to find out. I suggest you watch closely, Admiral. You will want to tell people about this." Before Krenth could respond, Daniel ended the communication and turned to his crew. "Initiate quantum cascade," he ordered. Kevin's hands flew across his console, entering the final authorization codes that Dr. Wright had entrusted to only. The Vorathian swarm's hive intelligence had consumed 17 civilizations and faced hundreds of different military technologies in its expansion across the Outer Rim. But nothing in its collective memory prepared it for what it encountered when the quantum cascade activated. Every Columbus ship that existed in superposition shared a single consciousness distributed across multiple probability states, which meant that Daniel Ross experienced standing on hundreds of bridges simultaneously, seeing through hundreds of view screens at once, commanding an entire fleet while being a single captain. The sensation would have driven most beings insane, but humanity had spent 5 years training for exactly this. Learning to expand consciousness across quantum states the way ancient monks had learned to expand awareness through meditation. "All vessels confirm cascade stability," Lisa Chun reported from her navigation station, her voice echoing across every bridge as hundreds of versions of herself spoke in perfect synchronization. Quantum coherence holding at 97%, the swarm bioships had been advancing in their standard assault formation. Organic vessels pulsing with anticipation of adding more mass to their collective. But now their hive minds struggled to process the impossible data. Their sensors showed one human ship, then hundreds, each reading as the original, each occupying a slightly different probability state. Creating a targeting nightmare, the first swarm vessels opened fire, launching biological missiles that sought heat and metal. But the Columbus fleet responded with coordinated precision that no Normata could match. Every ship knew what every other ship was doing because they were all the same ship. just existing across parallel timelines that had been forced to coexist in the same reality. Lisa's navigation calculations were perfect because she could see the battle from hundreds of angles simultaneously, computing trajectories that accounted for quantum uncertainty by experiencing all probable outcomes at once. The Columbus vessels phased between probability states, appearing solid to fire their weapons, then shifting to quantum superposition to avoid incoming fire. Swarm missiles passed through spaces where Columbus ships had been moments before, only to find those ships were now firing from completely different positions. Kevin Marsh monitored power distribution across the entire quantum fleet from hundreds of engineering stations, balancing energy loads in real time, rerouting power from ships in low-threat situations to vessels that needed extra shield strength. Swarm is attempting to adapt, one version of Kevin reported, while another version simultaneously announced. Compensating with cascade rotation pattern delta, the Allied fleet had frozen in shock for nearly 30 seconds, their commanders unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. On the Keltheran flagship, Admiral Jexnau finally found his voice. All ships support the human vessels. Whatever they are doing, it is working. The massive Keltheran battleships surged forward, their weapons arrays lighting up space with plasma fire, targeting swarm ships that were confused and disorganized by the quantum cascade assault. Xinthian cruisers joined the attack, their energy weapons coordinating with the Columbus fleet in patterns that Lisa transmitted across open channels. What had been a defensive fleet bracing for impact became an aggressive assault force, with humanity's impossible technology providing the tactical advantage that turned the tide. Nicole Park worked in hundreds of medical bays simultaneously, but found herself with no casualties to treat among the Columbus crews. The quantum cascade's ability to exist in multiple states, making the ships nearly impossible to hit. Instead, she monitored the biometric data of her crew, watching for signs of quantum disorientation or consciousness strain. "Captain," Nicole reported from every medical bay. Crew showing elevated stress markers, but all within acceptable parameters. "The quantum training is holding," Daniel acknowledged with a nod that happened on hundreds of bridges at once. His attention focused on the tactical situation. The swarm had numbers. Over 3,000 bioships against humanity's several hundred quantum vessels. But numbers meant nothing when your enemy could be everywhere and nowhere at once. A cluster of swarm ships attempted to overwhelm a single Columbus through concentrated fire, launching hundreds of biological missiles from multiple angles. That Columbus phased into quantum superposition, becoming probability rather than matter, and the missiles collided with each other in the empty space where the ship had been. Then, 3 other Columbus vessels materialized around the confused swarm cluster and fired in perfect synchronization, their weapons targeting the weak points that Lisa had identified through multi-timeline analysis. The swarm bioships erupted in organic explosions, their biological armor unable to withstand coordinated strikes that hit every vulnerable point simultaneously. Across the battlefield, similar scenarios played out dozens of times. The Columbus fleet moving with inhuman coordination because they were literally one consciousness operating multiple bodies. Admiral Krenth is requesting tactical coordination, communications reported. Daniel opened the channel, his image appearing on the Xinthian command ship's view screen. Krenth's crystalline form was still cycling through colors rapidly, a sign of extreme mental processing. "Captain Ross, we need to understand how to fight alongside your vessels. Our targeting systems are having difficulty distinguishing between your ships and empty space. We are transmitting our quantum signature markers now," Daniel replied, while Lisa simultaneously sent the technical data. "Your sensors should be able to track our probability states. Coordinate your fire with our phase patterns. This technology," Krenth said with something like awe in his translated voice, "it should not be possible. Every physics model we have says that quantum superposition cannot be maintained at this scale. Every physics model you have is based on assumptions that humanity did not share, Daniel said. Allowing himself a small smile, we approached the problem differently because we had nothing to lose by trying the impossible. The swarm's hive intelligence was learning, adapting its tactics in real time the way it had against every enemy. But the quantum cascade remained several steps ahead. When swarm ships began firing in probability patterns, trying to hit quantum-phased vessels, Kevin adjusted the cascade frequency, shifting the Columbus fleet to different quantum states. When the swarm tried concentrating overwhelming force on single targets, those targets simply stopped existing in that probability state and manifested somewhere else entirely. The Allied fleet began coordinating their attacks with the human vessels, Kelthoran battleships providing heavy fire support, while Columbus ships darted in and out of quantum states to strike weak points. Zintian cruisers used their energy weapons to herd swarm formations into kill zones where multiple Columbus vessels could execute devastating synchronized strikes. Even the Drachnary fighters, small and fast, learned to follow the probability markers that Lisa broadcast, using the confusion created by the quantum cascade to slip through swarm defenses on Earth. Dr. Amanda Wright watched the battle data streaming back through faster-than-light communications, her hand shaking slightly as she saw her life's work proving itself in the most dramatic way possible. 30 years of being dismissed, of having her papers rejected, of being called a dreamer and worse by the galactic scientific establishment. And now her quantum cascade technology was saving civilizations. Back at the battle, the swarm began to retreat. The hive intelligence had calculated that continuing the assault would result in total losses with zero probability of success, something it had never encountered before. Bioships that had advanced with absolute confidence now fled in disarray, their organic drives pushing them toward the edges of the system. "They are running," Admiral Jex now broadcast across all channels, his translator rendering his clicking as something close to jubilation. "The swarm is actually retreating." Cheers erupted across the Allied fleet, crews celebrating a victory that had seemed impossible when the battle began. But on the Columbus bridges, Daniel's expression remained focused. "Maintain pursuit," he ordered. "We cannot let them regroup and threaten other systems." The Columbus fleet phased through space, covering distances and heartbeats by existing in multiple locations simultaneously. Staying on the swarm's retreat path, Kevin's voice carried a warning tone from the engineering stations. "Captain, quantum coherence is dropping to 89%. The cascade is starting to strain our power systems. How long can we maintain?" Daniel asked. "At current levels, maybe another hour." Kevin calculated across hundreds of probability states. "After that, we risk catastrophic coherence collapse." Daniel weighed the options, knowing that every moment the swarm ran was a moment they could regroup, rebuild, threaten new worlds. But he also knew his crew's safety had to be considered. "Lisa, can you plot an intercept course that lets us hit their staging area before coherence fails?" he asked. Lisa's fingers danced across navigation controls, a consciousness computing trajectories across multiple timelines. "Yes, sir, but it will be close. We will have maybe 5 minutes to complete the attack before we need to collapse the cascade." "Then that is what we do," Daniel decided. "Nicole, prepare for potential quantum disorientation among the crew during collapse. Medical teams standing by." The journey back to Kepler Prime took 3 days at standard cruise speed, with the Columbus limping along on backup power systems while Kevin Marsh and his engineering team worked around the clock to stabilize the damaged quantum drives. The honor escort that surrounded the human ship had grown from the initial dozen vessels to over 200, with ships joining the formation at every waypoint. their crews wanting to travel alongside the vessel that had accomplished the impossible on a Columbus bridge. Daniel Ross sat in his command chair, reading through the flood of communication, requests that continued to arrive from governments, military leaders, scientific institutions, and news agencies across the galaxy. Another 17 requests for interviews, Lisa Chun reported from her station, looking slightly overwhelmed by the attention, including one from the Kelthoran Imperial Academy, asking if you would be willing to lecture their tactical students. Daniel shook his head with a tired smile. Forward all interview requests to Ambassador Hayes. He is better equipped to handle the diplomatic aspects. Nicole Park emerged from the medical bay, carrying her ever-present data tablet. Final medical assessments are complete. Everyone shows full recovery from quantum disorientation. No permanent effects from the consciousness distribution. That is the best news I've heard all day, Daniel said sincerely, knowing that the crew's well-being mattered more than any military victory. Kevin looked up from his engineering console, where damage reports scrolled across multiple screens. The quantum drives are completely burned out, sir. It will take at least 6 months to rebuild them, even with full shipyard support. We got exactly 1 use out of the cascade before the systems fried. 1 use was all we needed, Daniel replied. We proved the technology works and that humanity deserves to be taken seriously across the galaxy. Reactions to humanity's demonstration range from shocked admiration to carefully concealed concern. On the Kelthoran homeworld, the Imperial Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications of human quantum technology. They achieved in 50 years what our greatest minds declared impossible after millions of years of study, one council member said with clicking mandibles that conveyed deep unease. What else might they accomplish if given more time? Admiral Jacques Snell, who had witnessed the battle firsthand, stood before the council with a different perspective. I mocked them, he admitted publicly, something Kelthorans rarely did. I dismissed their contribution as the naive gesture of inferior beings. I was wrong, completely and utterly wrong. Are they a threat to the Empire? The council leader asked directly. Jacques Snell considered the question carefully before responding. They could be, if we continue to treat them as we have. But I believe they would prefer to be OIs if we offer genuine respect. Similar conversations were happening across every major civilization. The Xinthian collective scientists had already begun analyzing the sensor data from the battle, trying to understand the principles behind quantum cascade technology. The mathematics alone is revolutionary, one crystalline researcher pulsed to his colleagues. They approached probability theory from a completely different angle than our traditional models. They saw possibilities where we saw limitations. On the Draknari council ships, military strategists were recalculating threat assessments and alliance values. If humanity can do this with quantum mechanics, a scaled admiral mused, what might they accomplish in other fields where we have stopped innovating? Back on Earth, celebrations had erupted across every continent when news of the victory reached home. Dr. Amanda Wright found herself suddenly famous. No longer the laughed-at dreamer, but the genius who had given humanity a weapon that saved civilizations. She gave a press conference in Geneva, standing before cameras that broadcast to billions of humans and trillions of aliens. The quantum cascade was not built as a weapon, she said carefully, her words chosen to shape galactic perception. It was built as proof that new perspectives matter, that dismissing ideas because they seem impossible only limits our potential. Do you think other species will now respect human innovation? A reporter asked. Amanda smiled. I think they will stop assuming they know everything, which is perhaps more valuable than respect. The Columbus approached Kepler Prime to find the station surrounded by ships, not in defensive formations, but in ceremonial arrangements. Kelthoran battleships fired plasma salutes. creating brilliant light displays against the darkness of space. Xinthian vessels pulsed with colors that their culture reserved for honoring great heroes. Even species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence now sent representatives to greet the returning ship. "This is quite the reception," Lisa observed, watching the spectacle on the view screen. "Enjoy it while it lasts," Daniel said. Though his tone carried satisfaction rather than cynicism, respect has to be earned continuously. Not just once. Ambassador Richard Hayes waited at the docking bay as the Columbus settled into its berth, watching through the observation window as the ship that had changed everything finally came to rest. When the airlock opened and Daniel emerged with his crew, Richard stepped forward with an expression that mixed pride and relief. "Captain Ross," he said formally for the benefit of the cameras and alien dignitaries present. "On behalf of Earth and humanity, welcome home." Then more quietly, for Daniel's ears only, he added, "You magnificent, stubborn genius." "You actually did it," Daniel grinned. "We had good material to work with. A ship full of people who refused to accept that impossible meant permanent. The crew was escorted through corridors lined with alien beings who had come to catch a glimpse of the humans who had revolutionized warfare. Some looked at them with admiration, others with wariness, but none with the dismissive contempt that had colored every interaction before the battle. The Galactic Council had convened an emergency session, but this time the atmosphere in the Grand Chamber was completely different from the meeting where Richard had announced humanity's contribution. The same representatives who had laughed were now standing in respectful silence as Richard walked to the speaking platform. Admiral Jex now rose from his delegation's position and approached the platform, an unprecedented breach of protocol that made the entire chamber go silent. "Ambassador Hayes," the Keltheran said, his translator rendering his words with careful formality. "Before this session begins, I must speak. I owe humanity an apology. Richard had not expected this, and his surprise showed. I mocked your contribution," Jex now continued, addressing not just Richard but the entire assembly. "I laughed at the idea of one ship making a difference. I dismissed your species as inexperienced children playing at galactic politics. I was profoundly wrong, and I am profoundly sorry." Other voices rose from around the chamber, representatives from species that had joined in the mockery, now adding their own apologies. Richard let them finish before responding, his voice carrying across the massive space. "The Galactic Council has ancient civilizations with billions of years of accumulated knowledge," he said. "Humanity has 50 years of galactic experience and technology you dismissed as derivative. But what we have that perhaps has been forgotten is this. We know what it feels like to be underestimated. And that knowledge drove us to prove ourselves." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We do not want your apologies," Richard continued. "We want your respect, and more importantly, we want to be partners in genuine cooperation, not probationary members tolerated out of politeness." Admiral Krenth's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. "You have certainly earned both respect and partnership. The question now is what humanity wants in return for sharing the quantum cascade technology." Richard had prepared for this question, knowing it would come. "We will share the principles behind quantum cascade with any civilization that commits to using it only for defense," he stated clearly. "But we have conditions. First, the technology must never be used for conquest or oppression. Second, species receiving the knowledge must agree to mentor emerging civilizations rather than dismissing them. Third, we establish a joint scientific council where new ideas are evaluated on merit rather than the age of the civilization proposing them." The chamber erupted in discussion, delegates conferring with their advisors, weighing the implications. Some species balked at the conditions, particularly the requirement to treat younger civilizations as potential equals. But others, particularly those like the Zintians, whose strength came from scientific advancement, saw the wisdom in Richard's proposal. The human ambassador makes valid points, Krent announced, his voice cutting through the debate. We have become complacent. Assuming our ancient knowledge means we have nothing left to learn. Humanity has proven that assumption dangerously wrong over the next 6 hours. The council debated, negotiated, and ultimately voted. The resolution passed with overwhelming support. Humanity would be granted full council status with all rights and privileges. A joint scientific initiative would be established with human scientists in leadership positions, and the quantum cascade principles would be shared under the conditions Richard had specified. When the session finally adjourned, Richard found himself surrounded by alien diplomats wanting to establish better relations with Earth. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Theta system, and the galaxy had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. Though the most dramatic change was not in technology or politics, but in attitude. The Columbus hung in a specialized repair dock at Kepler Prime, its quantum drives completely rebuilt with improvements that made the original design look primitive by comparison. Captain Daniel Ross walked through the ship's corridors, running his hands along walls that had been reinforced with materials donated by 3 different alien civilizations, each wanting to contribute to humanity's flagship in the engineering section. Kevin Marsh supervised a team that now included 2 Zintian quantum specialists and a Keltheran power systems expert, working together on calibrations that would have been impossible without combining human innovation with alien experience. The new drives are stable at 112% efficiency, Kevin reported with evident pride. Dr. Wright's revised calculations were conservative again. We are getting better performance than even the optimistic projections. One of the Zintian engineers, a crystalline being named Prex, pulsed with colors that indicated impressed agreement. Human approaches to quantum mechanics continue to surprise our theoretical models. Your species sees connections we overlooked for millions of years. That is because we had to find new connections, Kevin replied. When you have billions of years of established science, it is hard to question the fundamentals. We had nothing to lose by questioning everything. On the bridge, Lisa Chun was training 4 alien navigation officers in probability-based tactical plotting. Her students representing species that had once considered human tactical thinking primitive. The key is not to think of space as fixed, she explained, moving holographic models around the display. Think of it as fluid probability. Every point exists in multiple states simultaneously. You navigate the states as much as the space. A Draknari student, her scales shimmering with concentration, attempted the calculation and failed for the 3rd time. I do not understand, the student admitted with frustration. My species has been navigating space for 40,000 years. But this makes no sense to my training. Exactly, Lisa said with a patient smile. Your training is the problem. You know too much about how things should work, which makes it hard to see how they could work differently. Humans did not know the rules well enough to be limited by them. In the medical bay, Nicole Park was hosting a symposium on quantum consciousness effects, presenting findings to doctors and scientists from across the galaxy. When human consciousness distributed across multiple probability states, she explained, displaying neural scan data, we observed coordination patterns that should not exist according to traditional neuroscience. The brain was functioning as a quantum computer, processing parallel timelines simultaneously. A Keltheran medical researcher clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. This has implications beyond military applications. Could quantum consciousness distribution help treat neurological disorders? That is exactly what we are exploring now, Nicole confirmed. Human medicine was focused on individual treatment, but quantum approaches might allow distributed healing across probability states. preventing diseases before they manifest in primary timeline across Kepler Prime Station. Similar scenes played out in dozens of laboratories and training facilities. Human scientists were no longer struggling to get their papers published. They were being recruited to lead research initiatives. Human military officers were teaching at academies that had existed for millennia. Their unconventional tactics now standard curriculum. Human diplomats were mediating disputes between ancient civilizations. Their fresh perspectives valued for seeing solutions that tradition-bound species had missed. Ambassador Richard Hayes stood in his office overlooking the main concourse, watching the flow of beings from hundreds of species moving through the station. 6 months ago, humans walking through that crowd would draw contemptuous glances or pitying smiles. Now they drew nods of respect, requests for collaboration, even autograph seekers from young aliens who saw humanity as proof that new ideas could triumph over ancient certainties. Admiral Jexnell had requested a private meeting, and Richard welcomed the Keltheran into his office with genuine warmth that would have seemed impossible half a year earlier. "Ambassador," Jexnell began, settling his large form into a chair designed to accommodate his physiology. "The Keltheran Empire has a proposal for Earth's consideration." "I am listening," Richard replied, curious about what the once dismissive admiral might suggest. "We want to establish a joint military academy," Jexnell explained, combining Keltheran's strategic doctrine with human tactical innovation. "We believe the combination could produce officers superior to what either civilization could train alone." Richard considered the proposal carefully, seeing both the opportunity and the deeper implication. "You are proposing that the Keltheran Empire, one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations, learn from humanity as equals," he stated, making sure he understood correctly. "More than equals in some respects," Jexnell admitted, his mandibles clicking with what Richard had learned to recognize as humble acknowledgement. "My species has 10 million years of military history, but we have been refining the same strategies for the last million years. You have 50 years and you revolutionize warfare. That is not luck. That is perspective we desperately need." "Then we accept," Richard said, extending his hand in the human gesture of agreement that was becoming common throughout the galaxy. Earth would be honored to establish such a partnership. Admiral Krenth had a different proposal, one that surprised Richard even more. "The Zintian Collective wishes to fund a human-led research initiative," the crystalline being announced during a council session. "We will provide resources equivalent to 50 billion Earth credits. With only one condition: humans must lead the research and we follow your methodologies." Other council members stirred with interest, some with barely concealed envy. "You want the Zintian Collective, known across the galaxy for scientific supremacy, to follow human research protocols?" A representative from the Dragnari asked with obvious skepticism. "The Zintians became known for scientific supremacy by recognizing superior approaches when we encounter them," Krenth replied, his form pulsing with absolute certainty. "Human scientists achieved in 50 years what we could not in millions. Clearly, their approach has merit worth adopting." The initiative was approved, and within weeks Dr. Amanda Wright found herself directing a research complex that employed scientists from 20 different species, all working under principles she had developed while being laughed at by the very institutions now begging to learn from her. On Earth, the transformation was equally dramatic. Cities that had felt isolated from galactic affairs now hosted embassies from dozens of alien civilizations. Universities that had struggled to attract alien students now had waiting lists spanning years. The planet that had been dismissed as a backwater had become a destination for anyone seeking innovation and fresh thinking. But perhaps the most significant change was happening among the younger species. The civilizations that had joined the Council in the past few centuries and faced the same dismissive treatment humanity had endured. They watched humanity's rise with hope and inspiration. If humans could earn respect through innovation, despite being mocked, perhaps they could too. A delegation from the Vexery, a species that had joined the Council only 30 years before humanity, requested a meeting with Richard, their ambassador. A bipedal being covered in soft fur, spoke with barely contained emotion. For 3 decades we have endured condescension from ancient civilizations, she said. They treat us like children, dismiss our ideas without consideration. Now they fear doing the same to us because of what happened when they did it to you. You gave us something more valuable than technology. You gave us proof that being young does not mean being wrong. Richard felt the weight of that responsibility, understanding that humanity's achievement carried implications beyond just Earth status. Use that proof wisely, he counseled. We did not earn respect by demanding it or by being aggressive. We earned it by solving problems the old ways could not solve. Show the galaxy what Vexery innovation can accomplish. The young ambassador left with renewed determination. And Richard knew that other species were having similar realizations. Humanity had not just changed its own position in the galaxy. It had changed the entire dynamic of how established civilizations treated emerging ones. Back on the Columbus, final preparations were underway for the ship's first mission since the quantum drives had been rebuilt. Daniel stood on the bridge with his crew, feeling both excitement and the comfortable familiarity of being home. All systems show green, Kevin reported from engineering. Quantum cascade generators are operating at peak efficiency. We have enough power for sustained operations without the burnout we experienced last time. Navigation systems fully calibrated, Lisa added. I have plotted probability matrices for 17 different scenarios. We are ready for anything. Medical bay prepared for quantum consciousness distribution, Nicole confirmed. Biometric monitoring upgraded to track crew health across all probability states. Daniel settled into his command chair.